Welcome to the Chalk Talk Gym podcast, where we explore insights into healthcare that help uncover new opportunities for growth and success. I'm your host, Jim Jordan. In today's episode, we're joined by Sandie Dela Cruz. She's an innovator at the intersection of healthcare, technology, and medical devices. She has a background in spanning audiology, corporate training, and now digital solutions. Sandie brings a unique perspective of the evolving landscape of healthcare. In this episode, we'll explore the transformative potential of AI medicine, from improving physician training through virtual reality simulations to revolutionizing patient diagnosis and care. Sandie shares insights on how digital tools can reshape medical affairs and bridge gaps in healthcare access. We'll also discuss the challenges and opportunities in adapting to rapid change in technology in the medical device industry. So whether you're a healthcare professional, a tech enthusiast, or simply curious about the future of medicine, this conversation offers valuable insights into the innovations shaping patient care. So Sandie, tell me and the audience a little bit more about yourself.
Being professional, then moved into the corporate world into more of operational excellence. And with that is the exposure to digital solutions. How I got into this is started off when I was in the Philippines. When I was in high school, I think that was the advent or development of the internet era. I still remember the modem days. And so that sparked my passion for digital solutions. And with the combination of my passion also for Legos, the restorative process of just looking at a process, how do we break that down and how can we be more efficient? I already had that mentality some sort when I was young. So that's how it evolved. And then I moved into college, went into more of a scientific background. My family is a distributor in the Philippines for hearing instruments, and that's why I came here in the US to finish my doctorate in audiology. Then I went into practice and found that I could provide better impact in training in corporate world versus seeing patients, because my passion is public speaking, continued development. And back then, the L&D space, it was still siloed amongst other corporate functions. So I had the goal and task on how our L&D operations, at least, would merge with the corporate commercial operations.
Yeah, just for our audience, what's L&D?
Learning and development.
Okay.
Yeah. And so then that evolved into just learning about process, how to make it more efficient. I got exposed to different engineers. They taught me the Lean Six Sigma process. And looking at even that, so we were going through different Kaizens. I did not have any knowledge of that. So I will honor my company for providing me all of that knowledge before. So they provided me all the tools necessary to evolve and grow. I took that, I ran with it, and now I work for Edwards Life Sciences specifically to look at what our current state is and how can we eliminate silos among different groups.
So Kaizen for our audience is a Japanese word for continuous improvement, right?
Correct.
So it's like a cultural attitude that overlays Lean and Six Sigma. Right. But you started out, I saw on your LinkedIn that you started out in Siemens. So you started out in equipment.
Yeah.
And is that what gave you exposure to how the medical industry processes things? Because that was, if you go back at that time, that was the entryway, because healthcare IT at that point in time was really oriented towards billing, right? It wasn't.
That was back in the 2000s. I remember that. I will tell you, Siemens, when I visited their factory, it was in Singapore back then. We were trying to replicate how they were doing things because we were going to put a manufacturing company in the Philippines, because the back and forth of hearing aids from Singapore shipping to the Philippines was just extremely expensive. So my father tasked me to go to Singapore, stay there for 3 months, be immersed in that process. And it was truly amazing. It was back again in 2000. They had everything optimized down from how many minutes will it take for this chip to go from this point to this point. And there's already this place where efficiency, where, okay, in this amount of time, we're able to produce this amount of chips. And I was able to even experience how to, back then in 2000, they were still using soldering irons to solder each chip to a wire function of a hearing aid. There was no AI. It was still, there was some sort of AI component already in hearing aids, which is sound classification, memories, the basic function of AI at least. So not, it has evolved over time, right? But AI has been present since the 1970s or
And I think since you've introduced some words to the audience, I'd continue with that. So there's
yeah.
before automation, they would have these tools and jigs and fixtures, and the Japanese would call them pokeyokes, right? So they're foolproofing devices. And I think what's important from that experience is when you take it into healthcare and you realize where healthcare is at and where these manufacturers are at, even today, 20 years, 25 years later, there's just such a gap.
There is such a gap, right? I think it's because of the regulations associated also to the healthcare industry, at least the one that encircles it. There's limitations to at least the speed of how they can implement things also.
And I think talking to my chief financial officer friends who work in hospitals, it's more of a, they have their costs in big buckets. It's very hard to get down to individual procedures. Now at Edwards, what is your place in the continuum of healthcare? What is it that you do for Edwards? Because I think of them as catheters and equipment is my vision of them. Am I incorrect in that?
Edwards Life Sciences, now, if you've heard about, it's been in Wall Street, right? We have already spun off one of our business unit, which is critical care, for us to concentrate on structural heart. So now we have one main goal. So it will be more on structural heart diseases and how Edwards can help those people that have that condition. And we can have a laser focus on that one. So it will be heart valves. Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah, I was going to ask you, what is structural heart? You said it's heart valves. What else is it?
So heart valves, anything that's with regards to the surgical component of it. So now there's just basically two functions really at Edwards. We have a company that's under the business units that's for transcatheter heart valves. And we have another business unit for the mitral side of the valves, right? So that's the different parts of the heart right there. And then we have the surgical portion. The surgical portion also helps on the surgical portion of structural heart diseases. Yeah, so that's at least the three main functions. And then we have what we call our advanced technologies, where all the research is done.
So you're in the digital solutions and analytics group. How does that fit within the continuum?
So I'm sitting in medical affairs.
Okay.
So that's how we sit in the continuum, is that we are in charge of physician training, scientific communications, publication, investigational studies. I'm part of that group. I'm part also of the group for the transcatheter heart valve group. So specifically for those physicians, our target audience is interventional cardiologists.
I grew up with interventional cardiology. So what are the challenges that you have as you work with these folks? Because your medical affairs is got this sort of like between regulatory and sales and marketing. It's an interesting place, right?
Yes, I would say you're definitely right. And especially in the medical device space, medical affairs is a new function. In the pharma space, it's definitely much more mature, right? You know what medical affairs is doing. But on the med device space, at least it has just been implemented recently. So really our main goal is to be the function does not have any commercial intention at all. Our intention is to disseminate scientific knowledge among the group. So we keep in mind the regulatory purpose of things, right? And the baseline, but at the same time, keeping in mind some of the commercial components. But this is where it gets real tricky, that you need to have that hard line. You can't have that mixture between sales and medical affairs.
Well, the same line is there for regulatory. So I once mentioned to a gentleman in a big pharma company, he was touring me through his medical affairs department that was sitting next to his regulatory. And I said, so what's the difference between these two? And he said, this group is full of my PhDs and that 10 things to be black and white, which is the regulations. And then I have moments where the question is, how important is this? And so you think when doctors are triaging in an emergency room, right? Something's very important, something's less important. We have time to discover. You need someone to be able to give that judgment. So it was always a good analogy for me. That was my sense about the differences between the functions.
That's definitely correct. That's on point. And I think a lot of people get confused of what medical affairs is. But we have under us is a pool of talent. Our VP actually tells us that we are the Black SEAL team of the company because we are highly specialized. So we have physicians underneath us, PhD, biostat, our biostat team. So every scientific paper that you see that goes through a process within medical affairs that it gets thoroughly vetted, not only on the regulatory side, but also on the medical affairs side, because we want to look at the scientific landscape of interventional cardiology and make sure we are providing value.
You mentioned devices. It's a relatively new function. Is it like 15, 20 years old, would you say?
Yeah, for med device, to have medical affairs, yes.
Yeah. So to not get company specific, but just a broader view of that 20-year history, what has changed in that role in 20 years, or what sort of perspective or tools that are new to you that you didn't have when you started?
I'll talk specifically to my experience, right? I think what I've seen how medical affairs have evolved through a medical device company is first, initially, it was solely focused on scientific papers. And then it grew to investigational studies. Then it grew to physician training, but specific on opinion leaders, key opinion leaders. Then now it moved on to my group, which is operations and digital solution. So this is how it has really evolved because one, we're now entering the era of how can we use digital tools to proliferate our knowledge within the community, right? If you've also seen our audience has changed. So let's just take, for example, the new fellows that are coming in now. Scientifically, they get some of their information via papers, but they like the easy access of Twitter and the digital opinion leaders providing their information there because they can easily see it versus a paper of how many pages and they only have some time to read about it. So what does the opinion leader say about it? And let me see if I'm interested about it. Versus back then, we didn't have digital opinion leaders, right? It was mostly like papers, podiums, those kinds of things, and discussions.
And now I'm aging myself. So because you didn't have a digital solution to go to, you would also train your sales reps and certain people to cover regions should you have an issue. So I remember my father being slightly horrified early in my career that I had a pager and you'd actually call into the OR if you had like a vena cava filter slip and the doctor. But you try to educate and say that these companies that design these things are actually the best in class, right? They're educated and they've got to get that education out there.
Mm-hmm.
So now with digital solutions, is this an opportunity for you to know that there's no confusion in the communication on a situation to a customer? Meaning that I'm assuming you're starting to roll AI into this in some form or another.
Yes, I would say specifically to generative AI, our company is in the stages of writing policies around that. as I've said, like AI has been used by many of the industries already, right? There's automations already, process automations. So that has been, our company has been using that, but generative I think that's where we see a lot of value. And we actually have an AI and data strategy team specifically sitting in the commercial side. So how can we provide tools for our physicians to better evaluate certain things? So we work with echoes, right? Echocardiograms. I think you've seen this and it's been posted to a lot of like different websites, the development of this, of the identifications of certain diseases, and AI would just take a look at it. And now how can we just have a physician take a look at it, review it, and that eliminates a lot of lag time. It also eliminates just the amount of time that a physician needs to look at it. Because you have to remember, for one physician, how many things, one, they are already seeing patients. Second, then you have all of these readings that you want this person who has expertise in this disease to read it because their peers need their expert consultation. They can't just read it in 24 hours. Usually it takes 3, 5 days of turnaround time. And with the use of AI, I think this is where we're trying to look at how can we or not eliminate, but just minimize that gap.
Could you define generative AI for our audience?
Yeah, you've seen, I think, Chat GPT, Claude, Bard, all of that's a form of generative AI. Anything that generates from GPT is called pre-trained, right? Generative pre-trained function already. You have the database that you have, and then if you ask a question, the AI will try to parse through all the knowledge that they have and create an output for you based on the questions or question you answered.
That's interesting. There's a company I know about, you might know about, its name's Imacor, and they are focusing on hemodynamic ultrasound for understanding how you treat people with fluid issues and heart issues. And when you realize there's 3 or 4 things that you move around that are dynamic, but we've actually haven't measured it today. What we're doing is looking at the flow coming out of the heart and trying to make the best decisions we can. And it seems to me that these are the types of things that AI can start enabling so that people can act quicker. And I imagine that part of the importance of this technology and this approach for your company is that you can't have your professional, your clinical, and your sales rep people everywhere, right? So we've got physician shortages coming up. We have issues in rural health. These technologies have a lot of value. So where are you guys in the AI approach?
We are definitely we have a research team for it. To where it is, I cannot really divulge that, but what I can say is we're working very hard to make sure that, see, here's the gap. I will tell you in the general landscape because this is close to my heart because I actually have a neighbor that's close to me that just recently passed from heart disease.
Yeah.
It could have been prevented. The problem is it was already too late when he saw the physician. Yeah. The problem with heart disease is sometimes you think you're just breathing heavily. Oh, it's just old age. I'm getting older. And then so you don't go to the doctor. And so you just you climb a number of steps and you're like, and you just think, oh, I'm just tired. You don't get your heart checked. So that's where the gap is. If you look at our physical, like our yearly physicals, Kaiser, I will tell you, has the best closed loop system.
They do. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Exactly. If you go to a private professional, I think that's where the gap is that one, okay, you get tested by your primary care physician. I'm breathing heavily. I'm having trouble. And they will just take a look at it. They'll give you, okay, see this physician. You might or you might not see that physician. That's a problem. And now where would that patient go afterwards? It's a drop off. No one follow up on them. On the next visit, maybe they will visit their primary care physician again, or maybe they'll go to another one. That's another issue right there.
It's funny you say this. I'm involved in this company called Treat Space that started out literally, it's a beautiful, sad story also, like everything we do is personal, but I had the president of it was actually ran an ad agency, and he lived next door to this person who had a brain tumor, and his name was Adam. And he goes on to tell the story that Adam says to him, I can go on Facebook and find out who my last girlfriend's dating, but I can't find a doctor with this particular brain cancer that I'm involved in. And so he started this company, and part of it, the company ended up morphing into this referral management closed loop system. And what's shocking is I go to my primary care physician. They say, go see this cardiologist, this oncologist, whatever it is, and there's no follow-up. And this is where Kaiser is dogged at, right? Making sure that it's a closed loop. But most systems aren't that way. And not only has he solved the problem with this data, he started this process before MIPS, which for the audience is a value-based bonus for physicians, for lack of a word. And it's about how do you track that your patients? Well, they didn't have a method to track. So now that they have this method, he can actually tell you that the perceived great doctors in the area actually don't have great follow-up, and that some of the smaller doctors are absolutely amazing. And then when they start showing the data to these physicians, they're unaware that their practice is behaving this way. And so I think this is absolutely critical. So where do you see this technology solving this problem of your neighbor in the future?
I think one with the system that you have, I think if we can also have standard practices or best practices or standard metrics for all. You have to remember cardiology is a big space. So you can go to a general cardiologist. There's a difference of how they see things from mild, moderate, severe, right? You might have something mild right now, and then they won't refer you. They'll say, oh, we'll just follow up. And then the patient does not follow up. And as you said, I think fixing with this technology, one, I think there should be a technology where there's a lack of education about one, the current disease state that you have and where it could lead to if you don't even do things. They don't know that. They don't know that my neighbor did not know that this would happen. He was young. He was only 60 years old. Long life to live. But because he first saw his physician 5 years ago, COVID happened, did not follow up. A year ago, just started to have fainting spells. And now when he visited the physician, it's now too late to even put in a heart valve.
So it strikes me, and both of us has been in a lot of ORs over the years and a lot of cath labs and talking to patients. And it strikes me that so many people think that when I cross that line, whatever that line is, end-stage renal disease, diabetes, whatever it is, that I can get back over the line. So I won't worry about it till I cross the line. And I think these educational programs and the ability to start connecting, they call it a real-time healthcare system, which is a big vision that we probably won't see for a long time. But how can we connect our phones and our watches and our pulses and our oxes and see all these things and find the drift early and change it? And there's a lot of education to go with that, but it's also, from an equity perspective, not a lot of people can afford the Apple Watch or afford a scale that connects. So we haven't quite yet, as a healthcare system, recognized that there may be value. Today we see it as an expense, but there may be value to including these in the future. So you've had a lot of change in your life and in your career. So can you share with the audience maybe a time when you had to adapt or shift quickly and strategically to get to where you're at now?
Yeah, my background in the Philippines initially was actually optometry because
But I'm like, how did audiology in?
well, I'll tell you. So my father, again, my father had this business already, audiology business, since in the 80s. And so he had two daughters. So the plan was one would be in the vision and the other one would be on the ENT space. My sister pursued that ENT space all the way through. So she's now an ENT surgeon taking over my dad's practice. I'm supposed to be an optometrist in ophthalmology, and we merge our practice together. In Europe, they're merging vision and hearing, right?
I did not know that, actually.
Yes, in Europe, they're doing that. So my father had that vision to bring that in Asia, or at least in the Philippines. And when I went to pre-med, I was like, this is not for me. Again, as a young kid, I always knew I was designing my dad's website. Back then, when you needed to code and there was no chat GPT to copy and paste code, I had to learn how to code by my own, by myself, old school way. And so was my passion. But I guess, again, with education, right? In the Philippines, that's not seen as, if you're not a doctor, a lawyer, or some of that medical field, you're not successful. I went that route because I did not know any better. Again, I was 17 years old, going into college, and I don't know what to do. My parents decided for me, and I'm like, okay, I'm happy to take it. Went through it. And again, college life was just all about having fun. I loved it. But then when it's time to become a physician, I was very squeamish on blood, and I could not. Like, I was fainting every time there was a cadaver. I'm like, this is not for me. I have to do something else. So my dad told me, why don't you take up audiology? I think you would be a great add-on to our business and you can help out. And you know what? I started helping him out in business. So we started out with 3 clinics and now it's into 20. We have over 20 clinics back home. So I helped build. Definitely my sister and my dad is continuing that process now. How I've evolved is actually I was supposed to go back to the Philippines, but I met my husband here in the US. So I went into corporate world.
Ah.
Yeah, I went into training, and that's where actually I saw my passion because you would think training does not have a lot of technology, but I had an amazing manager. She allowed me to explore the bounds of training and development, where use every digital technology you can possible. So back then, when e-learning wasn't even big, we were already exploring e-learning. When back then we were visiting physicians, I was already implementing virtual engagement with them using Calendly as a tool. And Calendly wasn't even a big thing back then.
Mhm.
Using avatars recently, avatars, if you
Yes.
know some of the companies, I was using that when one of the companies was still in their B series funding. So very early on, I'm that kind of person that I tend to look at technology and see how can I implement this to be much more efficient for me and for my team. And I think that's how you evolve as a person. I think now I'm so excited actually with all of the generative AI coming out, just the knowledge within our fingertips. And when you're seeing all, and I think this is where we can solve this because one, I don't know if you've listened to Google's showing the latest development of using one of the ophthalmology tool to detect heart disease early on. And you were talking about connectivity and all of that. And I was thinking also, if you look at Apple, they have so much data on us. Just if you can connect all that, I'm also like, I went into genetic testing for myself
Mhm.
because I can see the customization of pharmaceutical. And I just found out that my father was actually taking this drug. And genetically, at least for me, this drug wasn't like, it would not be effective for me. So I think if my dad had a genetic test, this drug would not even be effective for him at all. It's for heart disease also, by the way. And so I was like, wow. See, even that alone.
Oh, it's so interesting because I break down AI into this is sufficiency component of it and operational excellence, which I think is the low fruit because nobody dies from that if it goes
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah.
And then we have the insight wisdom, right? The insight is I'm looking at a patient, they've got these issues, and 1 in 100,000 could have this situation. It doesn't come up on your triage list, right? So
Mhm.
it's a really good reminder. And I also think it's great in a crisis for like emergency rooms to remember that you might have skipped something or something like that. But those I think are going to be a ways off. I think
Yeah.
we're going to do the efficiency and then been involved in robotics and stuff like that. That's very, I call that closed loop in the OR. It doesn't really go outside of the OR, so you don't worry about privacy and security because it's all capped there. But
Mhm.
how are you keeping current on all these technical changes? Because you were trained one way, and then there's an adult education piece, and I'm going to forget the regulation from the FDA, but on medical devices, I'm going to say 10 years ago, they basically had you take your device and your equipment and you had to actually test. Like, so you'd work with people on day one,
Mhm.
and they'd come in on day two and they'd have to run the equipment and test the intuitive nature of the buttons and everything. And that wasn't there 20 years ago.
Mhm.
So that's all evolving. But now, as we're learning human AI interface, that's like cutting edge stuff. So how are you keeping current on all that?
Again, I think ever since back then, this was something, a passion of mine. I've always been technology driven. I just attend NVIDIA as their health conference. I attend, there's amazing individuals there. And believe me, the presentations that see of what could be possible for healthcare, diagnosis, prognosis, everything that they're presenting right now on paper, I'm just fascinated with it. And I can see application. I've always done this where I'm like, okay, this could be applied this way. My personality, I'm more of a visionary, so I see things. So I need someone to be like on my team that's more of a, this is how you do it.
Yeah.
And I can execute also, but I'm more first a visionary. And so when I see one of the Google CEOs seeing that this is a possibility, I can just see even the application of it in rural communities. Because you were
Mm.
even, let's not even talk about rural, let's just talk about California. Just access to even a heart team. So if you look at, let's say you look at the Southampton, that area, that spot right there, south side, the closest heart team they have is Cedars. And if you don't have a car, do you know how long bus take? It's like a 2 hour bus ride. So can you imagine if you are having a heart problem, or just not even a heart problem, just having, you think you have issues of breathing heavy and being feel lightheaded. Now just go to the nearest physician. That might not even diagnose that as a heart problem also.
So I did a strategic planning session with a nonprofit hospital group in Idaho, of all places.
Mhm.
And one of the things that they did was have all these little, I don't even know if you call them like 4 or 5 bed, 10 bed places all over, because
Mhm.
the main hospitals were 2 to 4 hours away.
Yeah.
And so they had a wonderful system that they had put together, but part of it was having the digital technology to be able to get some insight. So if I recall, your type are traveling a lot in the field. So you see a lot of competitive reps and you have a sense of beyond your culture, but just the entire medical device industry.
Yeah.
What sort of changes do you see the medical device industry is going to have to do in terms of recruiting people and dealing with these technology changes in the future? Because we've been mostly mechanical, electrical people, I guess would be the best way to describe it, right?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
an engineer.
Yeah.
I would say that the younger professionals coming in now has this vision of, or even knowledge of AI, right? I will tell you specifically, we are onboarding a lot of teams that have knowledge in AI coding. Python is really one of the foundations of generative AI. So we're recruiting that type of talent and bringing that in. So I think you should bring in that. You should also bring in people who have visions for those hard skills and those soft skills of like, where could this go? How can we connect all of these things?
I got involved with a group between Carnegie Mellon University and the University of Pittsburgh. They call themselves the Pittsburgh Learning Triangulum. And it's a group of professors that stepped back and said, learning's going to change. And even how we do science, we are ending up realizing that if we think about like cell to cell interaction, that has mechanical, electrical, it has all these things going on. And even our AI models that we have today are not prepared for that. So I think that's also going to be changing too. So, do you have specific resources you follow that the audience could check in on in terms of how you keep your resources going? Not besides going to a conference, but are there websites? Are there people you follow?
Yeah, definitely listen to podcasts like yours. Keep yourself updated on that one. I am not an employee of Siemens anymore, but the Siemens Health in Your podcast is actually really good. Like they have discussions about digital twin. We didn't even
Hmm.
touch that. That's amazing. That hopefully we can get there someday. And then even like looking into just general updates of OpenAI, right? If you've seen the update right now of OpenAI, that has great implications to education, where remember you can show the AI a picture of it. So just imagine, again, let's just imagine, let's forget about the regulatory aspect, the privacy component. I know there's that those are hurdles. I'm just talking about the vision of use.
Hmm.
Let's just imagine an echocardiogram, and you put that image in front of AI, and it's able to detect, okay, this is the possibility of this patient, or for you as a patient. See, sometimes when you come to a physician's office, they also said, oh, we'll send you the result after 3 weeks. You get the result, and you're like, okay, it's a one-liner, but they don't send you the images. What if they send you the images and OpenAI can actually educate you about what that disease is? What can it do for you? Like, if you don't do anything about it, this is what will happen. And this is what you need to do. Here's a list of physicians that are experts in this field. Go see them now, or because this is your risk profile.
And I
So,
think we were talking about the Apple Watches and stuff like that. They now have. I'm going to look at my phone. Just apologize to the audience and my guest. But there's apps now on HRV4 training for your heart and things like
yeah.
that. And I can actually notice that if I literally had a drink the night before, the next day, my numbers will be different. And
Yeah.
so you start making a cause and an effect. But if you don't know that, you just happily go along your way. So, what is the biggest lesson you've learned in your journey thus far?
I think the biggest lesson for me is to continually to make sure that we learn, but not only that we learn, we apply those learnings and we adapt. I think as the saying goes, if you don't adapt, you die. I think it's very true. And you've seen that before with the big companies, Kodak, Blockbuster. Who knew that all of those companies would just be bankrupt now?
Yeah. And I think AI can teach us to learn, meaning
Yeah.
that because you train a lot of people, I'm sure you're doing this very naturally as you listen to someone talk, you're determining whether they're visual, auditory, kinetic, you're
Mhm.
trying to determine how they learn. But when you're teaching in a classroom and you have 50, 60 students, or you're doing something live online, what I'm finding now is I can put a presentation into AI. I like Claude too. So in addition to ChatGPT, and you can ask, how can you misinterpret this slide? How can this word, I'm dealing with the Spanish culture, or I'm going to be in France. How could this word mean this thing? And it's shocking some of the feedback you get. And so I
Mhm.
think the other aspect here is we're probably going to have to relearn how to learn. And I think that maybe we used to have to regurgitate facts. That might be less important than understanding how things come together. Now, you need to know the facts to have systems come together, but I think we used to be focused on teaching pieces of facts as opposed to looking at how the system comes together. It's just amazing. So, what do you see as the biggest opportunity for growth and the biggest threat in healthcare as you look out in the next 5 or 10 years?
Wow. The greatest opportunity, there's a lot. There's, because again, we talked about digital twin. Let's talk about simulation learning for physicians to even
Yes.
have this capability. You don't need to practice on cadavers, and because cadavers are limited too. Each one of you now can be in virtual reality, practice all of the things that could go wrong, that critical errors that could potentially cause death, right? You can practice it and see, okay, if I twist it this way, that will happen. And you can't do that in a replicative way when you're doing it in a cadaver because you've already destroyed the structure.
So we're going to have fighter pilot training for physicians, basically, right? That how do you handle many crises and
Yeah.
set up situations that you could never really present?
Yeah. And that's with just the training alone. So that's on the training of the medical portion. So I can just see that. How about having tapped into the knowledge of this experts that can't travel? And let's say for other countries, now you have an expert here in the US teaching someone, again, via VR, how to do this procedure, and the other person is in Singapore and the Philippines. There's now access to healthcare would be, how knowledge is being dispersed in the industry now is definitely much more better because of this industry or the technology that we have in this industry. How about even diagnosis of it? If we talk about the possibility of genetic personalized medicine, because one, you might think, why is this medication not working for this patient and it worked for this patient, but you're giving them the same medication?
Yes. Yeah.
So now with that, I'm excited about the future because we're seeing the glimpse of the future of AI. And I see we were talking about knowledge and education is extremely powerful, because if you know what you can do, then you can fight for it. So if you think you're not getting the right care from your physicians, you can say, well, based on what I read here, and you can even have sightings and say, here's the sightings to different publications. I want to be referred to this. Yeah, you can never do that back then because you didn't know. You just trusted your doctor to know everything.
I think too, now that you say this, I think the younger doctors also are coming out very comfortable with you bringing that data to the discussion. Yes. And you don't maybe see that in some of the more senior folks who've been around, or maybe people getting ready to retire. That's just not the way it was. But my wife had a situation where her doctor retired, mm-hmm. and she got a younger doctor, and we showed up with all the Dr. Google notes, and she sat there and patiently went through everything, which was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. Because again, you never know what you don't know, right? Again, you might be taught this way. And I had fantastic instructors, but that was back, I finished my PhD back in 2012, and that was knowledge at that point of time. Yes. There were new discoveries. So we can't blame our physicians if they don't know everything up to date, just because sometimes you do have a limit to what, even if you attend conferences, you can only absorb so much.
Sure. Well, and there's a lot of dynamics going on. I told you earlier, I was doing some qualitative interviews last year for a big pharma company, and we were talking to neurologists. Mm-hmm. And this gentleman made me literally cry. I mean, you have a Parkinson's patient, you have these patients for like 40 years. So mm-hmm. other specialties aren't like that. And so when you listen to what he or she was looking at, he recognizes the entire family is involved in this disease. Mm-hmm. And that if they get too tired or they get physically disabled, there's a lot of problems going on there. And so there was so many dynamics that he was managing. He ended up filling the place with, in his case, he could afford it, nurse practitioners or physician assistants to track that. Mm-hmm. And start envisioning now where information like that could come to you. It struck me, my dad's passed, but he had a pacemaker near the end, and the doctor would call him and say, last night this thing happened, I need to see you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so hopefully that's where we're going. Thank you so much for joining us. Would you have anything else you'd want to share with the audience?
No, I truly appreciate being at your podcast here. This has been a great conversation. I'm very passionate about, you can see how I get excited about the future, right? And I think we have hurdles to overcome with regulatory, privacy, but there's things already being done. And I think with the continuous growth of AI and technology, we will be our future state of healthcare. If we just let go of all of there's the commercial piece of this, that is the biggest hurdle. If we, as a community, unite and let down some of our guards with regards to that, I think we would be better in helping people improve their lives.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning into the Chalk Talk Gym podcast. For resources, show notes, and ways to get in touch, visit us at chalktalkgym.com.